Hot plasma bolts screamed through the air and seared Brian Mason's armor as he shielded the crying children, resolving that these alien bastards would only take them over his charred, dead body. Brian's railgun hummed with magnetic power as he held off the advancing reptilian death squad. His visor painted targets over the scaled faces twisted into smug sneers. The Norcadian commander Orin hissed a cruel ultimatum over the smoke and rubble. "Surrender the children, human scum, and I may let you leave with your limbs intact." Brian spat blood onto the cracked concrete. He'd battled these Norcadian pricks across a dozen worlds, seen their so-called warriors butcher civilians and torch cities. Decades of bitter war had proven that no human was safe under alien claws, especially not the innocent. He'd sworn to defend them no matter how sharp the talons or advanced the weapons, even if it meant his end. The human merc tightened his grip, servos whirring. "Eat shit and die slow, you gecko fuck." That snarled retort was all the motivation the reptilian raiders needed. High-pitched plasma shrieks, mixed with the cracks of hypersonic slugs as they pressed the attack. Brian's HUD flashed angry red with shield warnings. He barked into his team comms. "Target their heavy, don't let up." His fellow humans laid down covering fire as he hustled the kids back through the rubble of their devastated neighborhood. They just had to reach the transport and get the hell off this benighted rock. But as claws scrabbled over the steaming impact craters and a fresh volley of superheated gas ripped through the air, escape seemed increasingly desperate. Orin's scaled squads had numbers, position, and superior weaponry. All Brian had were guts, slugs, and the indomitable human will to protect the helpless. There would be no mercy for man or child in the Norcadian Empire's cruel grip. In a dark universe at war, one where hope was lost to the void and the strong devoured the weak, a single aging soldier and a huddled band of orphans made their stand against alien tyranny's relentless advance. The survival of innocence hung in the balance. "There's Temultusistutu." Brian crept through the shattered streets, the children huddled behind him. He scanned the ruins for any sign of the Norcadian patrols. The only sound was the crunch of rubble beneath their feet. Suddenly a hand reached out and yanked Brian into a bombed-out building. He spun, railgun ready, only to find himself face to face with a group of haggard human refugees. "You're not Norcadian," a grizzled man said, lowering his own weapon. "What are you doing out here with a bunch of kids?" "Trying to get them to safety," Brian replied, keeping his voice low. "I'm Brian, I'm with the Resistance." The man nodded. "Jax, former Norcadian prisoner." He gestured to the others. "We escaped during a riot. Been hiding out here since." Brian's eyes widened. "You were a prisoner. Do you know anything about their operations in the city?" Jax's face darkened. "I know they have a secret base beneath the city, and I know they're doing experiments down there, on human children." Brian's blood ran cold. The Norcadians were even more twisted than he thought. "We have to stop them." "I can help," Jax said. "I know my way around their security systems. I can get us in." Brian hesitated, torn. He had to get these children to the safe house, but he couldn't leave others to suffer at the Norcadians' hands. He turned to the refugees. "Can you get these kids to the safe house on the outskirts? The Resistance will take them from there." They nodded. "We'll keep them safe. You do what you have to do." Brian knelt down, looking each child in the eye. "Stay with these people. They'll protect you. I'll come for you as soon as I can." With that, he and Jax set off, picking their way through the war-torn streets. Norcadian patrols seemed to lurk around every corner. Brian and Jax took them out with quick, silent efficiency. Booby traps and aerial drones added to the danger. Brian nearly lost a leg to a hidden mine, and Jax took a graze from a drone's plasma bolt, but they pressed on, driven by their mission. Finally, they reached the base entrance, a fortified Norcadian stronghold bristling with advanced tech. Jax got to work on the security system, his fingers flying over the alien interface. With a satisfying click, the door slid open. Brian and Jax slipped inside, weapons ready. What they found within turned their stomachs. Dark, dank chambers housed dozens of human children hooked up to grotesque Norcadian machines. Some were so still they seemed barely alive. The Norcadians were draining their very life force. Brian's rage boiled over. Jax's face was set in a mask of fury. They knew what they had to do. These children would be freed, and the Norcadians would pay for their cruelty in blood and fire. Brian and Jax moved quickly, their hands flying over the grotesque machinery that imprisoned the children. With each restraint loosened, each needle pulled from delicate skin, a small victory was won. But time was not on their side. Suddenly the chamber echoed with the sound of clawed feet on metal. Orin burst in, his death squad fanning out behind him. Brian shoved the child he was freeing behind him, his railgun snapping up. "Get them out!" he yelled to Jax, opening fire. The chamber erupted into chaos. Plasma bolts seared the air, the stench of ozone mixing with the coppery tang of blood. Jax hustled the children towards the exit, shielding them with his body. Brian dove for cover, but Orin was on him in a heartbeat. The Norcadian lashed out, his talons raking across Brian's armor. Brian grunted, slamming his fist into Orin's jaw. Scales cracked under the impact. They grappled, rolling across the floor. Orin's reptilian strength was immense, his agility unmatched, but Brian fought with the fury of a man with nothing left to lose. He kicked Orin off him, sending the Norcadian crashing into a bank of machinery. Sparks flew. Brian pressed his advantage, raining blows down on Orin. But the Norcadian was far from finished. With a roar he surged upward, his claws closing around Brian's throat. Brian choked, black spots dancing in his vision. Desperately he reached for his gun. His fingers closed around the grip. He pressed the barrel to Orin's head, finger tightening on the trigger. "No!" The cry cut through the din of battle. Brian's eyes flicked to the side. A young girl, her face streaked with tears, stood amidst the carnage. "Don't," she pleaded. "Don't be like them." Brian hesitated, his finger trembling on the trigger. In that moment of indecision, Orin struck. He knocked the gun from Brian's hand and flung him aside, disappearing into the depths of the base. Brian pulled himself to his feet, his body aching. Jax rushed over, his face grim. "I hacked their system," he said. "Brian, it's worse than we thought. They're building a weapon, a planet killer, and they're using the children's life force to power it." Brian's blood ran cold. The stakes had just gotten a lot higher. "We have to stop them," he growled. "We have to destroy this place, bury their twisted experiments." Jax nodded. "I'll free the rest of the children, get them to safety. You plant the charges." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one they had. As Brian set the explosives, he could only pray that they would be enough, that the children they had fought so hard to save would have a future beyond this nightmarish place. Brian and Jax worked quickly, their hands flying over the restraints holding the children. One by one, the captives were freed, their frail bodies carried to safety. But even as they worked, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the base. Orin burst into the chamber, his squad fanning out behind him. Brian's heart sank. They were out of time. He turned to Jax, his eyes hard. "Get them out. I'll hold them off." Jax nodded, gathering the children. As they fled, Brian faced down the Norcadians, his gun blazing. The chamber erupted into chaos. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, scorching the walls. Brian ducked and weaved, taking down Norcadians with precise shots. But there were too many. A cry of pain cut through the din. Brian spun to see Jax collapse, a smoking hole in his chest. The children huddled behind him, screaming. Brian's vision went red. He charged forward, his gun spitting death. The Norcadians fell before him, but more took their place. He reached Jax's side, his friend's blood pooling on the floor. Jax grabbed his arm, his eyes fierce. "Go," he hissed. "Get them out." Brian hesitated, torn, but the sound of Orin's taunts decided for him. He gathered the children and ran, leaving Jax behind. They raced through the base, explosions shaking the walls. Brian planted the charges as they went, his heart heavy. They burst out into the ruined city. the sun blinding after the darkness of the base. But there was no time to rest. Orin was right behind them, his eyes blazing with hate. Brian pushed the children behind him, facing his nemesis. They clashed in a whirlwind of blows, Brian's armor sparking under Orin's claws. He was tired, injured, but he fought on, fueled by rage and desperation. But Orin was too strong. He knocked Brian to the ground, looming over him. Brian's vision blurred, his body screaming in pain. Orin's foot pressed down on his chest, talons digging into flesh. The Norcadian's eyes glittered with triumph. "Now you die, human," he hissed. Brian's hand scrabbled at his belt, fingers closing around the detonator. He looked up at Orin, a bloody grin splitting his face. "Not today, lizard." He pressed the button. The ground heaved as the explosives detonated, the base imploding in a ball of fire. The shockwave threw Brian and the children clear, slamming them into the rubble. Orin screamed as the flames engulfed him, his body disintegrating in the inferno. And then it was over. The base was gone, the planet killer destroyed, the children were safe. But as Brian lay in the dirt, his body broken, he wept. For Jax, for all those lost. The sound of engines filled the air, human dropships come to take them home. Brian watched as the children were loaded aboard, their tear-streaked faces filled with hope. He was a hero, they said. He had saved them all. But as Brian looked out over the war-torn landscape, he knew his fight was far from over. The Norcadians would return angrier than ever, and he would be there to meet them. For he was Brian Mason, defender of humanity, and he would never stop fighting until his last breath. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.